Let's see. Oh.
Okay, that should be enough time. I don't think that we don't have a written agenda, do we?
Um,
John, I mean, is anybody?
I do not. So
Okay.
no,
All right, so we'll just assume that agenda is approved. I want to thank John and whoever was involved in creating those documents. Did everybody see the documents that John sent earlier today?
yeah.
So the main one, so there were, going from memory here, there's two that I want to look at together, but the common mistakes, that would be something that would be good to have sent to the whole board or just posted on our board docs. Just to kind of think through it, I think those of us that have been involved in hiring in the past have probably had some of that, but it wouldn't hurt to kind of think it through. And the document I wouldn't mind starting with is the rubric that was sent, and can someone share that screen? Or I could share.
I'll share it. I'll share the screen, and there it is. Are you able to see it?
Yes. So this, so I'm thinking it makes sense to start with this because the questions that we ask should get us to the items on this rubric. So this will be what the board would have in front, each board member would have in front of them as we're interviewing the firms. These are not questions. So this first element here, experience and diversity of team members involved in the project, we would not ask that question. We would surmise that information from the other questions that we ask. So I wanted to make sure that people understand this rubric before we determine the questions. And then also if we want to make any changes. I thought that this, especially for 30-minute interviews, that this does a good job of getting us to the real gist, to the real meat of the interview. So I don't know if anybody has any response as we go through. We would be scoring these in this fashion and then adding up the points. Ms. Pitts, would the high score overall automatically mean the firm should be chosen?
Typically, yes, because I'm not sure how else you would determine it. So I think, or you could, I mean, there are a couple ways you could certainly do it. People could, well, let me stop and say, yes, that's the cleanest way to do it. To have people score it. Because theoretically, all three of these companies meet your minimum threshold, right?
Right.
And so
right.
It's not like during the first round where some people were just not acceptable, right? So that probably would be the cleanest way. And just like you have done in the past, in other instances, if you have ties or whatever, then people can make statements about. There can be some discussion about about it. But if it's clear, if 7 of you all rank one company, the highest based on your points, then certainly could be discussion, but it would be hard to justify making a big change from that.
Well, here's a couple scenarios, just want to make sure. So let's say we have a lot of number twos, And, but half of us like firm A really good and the other half don't. And then half of us like firm B really good and the other half don't, but everybody thought C was in the middle. So then we end up choosing C, even though none of us thought that C was the best firm. That's
Yeah,
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you wouldn't do that. You would not do that. You would have a fuller discussion. And
Okay.
remember, because this is not a sealed bid type situation where we
Okay.
had to have those really strict rules,
Okay.
you have latitude. The only thing that I would ask is that people individually score do their rubrics after right after the presentation, that you don't compare and contrast, right? That you look at that, because that's one of the best practice. You score right when you're after the thing, and then you guys can talk and you have some flexibility about who you choose.
Yeah, because the other thing I think is important is that at what point I would like the superintendent to weigh in on why one firm may have answered the question better from her opinion, even if the board didn't. So that would have, again, involve deliberation and discussion with the superintendent, which may go counter to a point system.
Right.
Okay.
And
right.
the point system, you can use the point system to give you a guide, and hopefully to have you have a guide. Perhaps you get down to 2, right? Based on the points, you can just kind of knock one out theoretically.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Sharon?
Sure.
So when we use the rubric, so you'll have the individual questions, and your questions, I'm assuming everybody will take notes on what people say, and then you use the rubric like you're suggesting to say, okay, based on what the candidate or the company said, I score it here, and then to get to what Dr. Baker is asking, as the discussion's going on, it's clearer if you have a clear first, second, third, but if it's really close or it's split, then that would be when you can go back to your questions and say, okay, on question number 2, we asked blah, 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 and it really resonated with me that this company said this, and I think that this is very aligned to the work that we're trying to do, and so on and so forth. That's what you're saying, right? That's how you would phrase it?
Yes. And I would use the language. So for example, if on question 3, Ms. Davis gave that response exceeds expectation, and Reverend Matthias gave it a 1, that it only somewhat met. Then there would be a discussion about, well, what did you hear that I didn't hear, as to why you kind of rated it. So you could get granular too.
Okay, Sharon, would you mind on Monday when we start doing just kind of giving us some coaching from your legal vantage point on how we should proceed and what we just discussed?
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I don't mind at all.
Okay, thanks. Okay, just wanted to kind of clarify that before we went through this rubric and we knew what we were looking at. So can we go through, Dr. Roby, would you mind going back to the top? Okay, so experience and diversity of team members involved in the project.
Now, you all asked for experience in the project in your RFP, right? But there was a lot of conversation at the board meeting around, well, the diversity of the candidates, it could be racial or gender or whatever, or the mix of people. And so we threw that out there as a possible point that you might want to ask about and then rate on.
Is there any way we can separate those?
Well, remember, these are not the questions. This is just the rubric.
That's right.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Right. So we can ask. So we're not looking at the questions yet. We would ask different questions that would hopefully get to these answers, and it wouldn't be the same question.
I guess my concern is, what if they have amazing experience, but their team's not diverse? How do I rate them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, let's think about the question for that. Most important, this is me, is the experience they have working with the diverse school districts.
So maybe that needs to be worded differently because
Yeah.
it should, you know what I mean?
Go down to the next one and let's see if that captures some of
The
that.
next one, yeah, let's just review all of them.
Yeah, and then we can
And then
go
come back to individual. Experience of the firm with strategic planning with equity focus, which again is different than diverse school districts, right? It could have, so we could have an equity focus in Rockford or Sparta looks different than an equity focus in Grand Rapids. So, but we do want we want all the firms to recognize that moving towards equity is we want them to show us how that happened in the work that they've done in the past.
And you could certainly add to that question, or you could certainly say with the equity focus in schools with diverse students, clearly, if that's, you know.
Let's go on. So we don't end up, let's see the next one. Methodology and specificity of the plan. And then next one. Quality and usefulness of deliverables. I like these as broad categories for the rubric. Not for the questions, but for the rubric. It allows us to go different directions. So diversity, board members might think, well, I want to have a racially diverse staff or racially diverse school district. It allows us to do different things. And then in the end, it brings up more questions that we can discuss.
Right. Because my suspicion is that we tend to look at racial diversity. I want to see Black, I want to see brown, I want to see whatever. And and hopefully this is either in the back or the forefront of our mind, but also cross-culturalness in my sense. So for example, just to pick on you, Dr. Baker, I would consider you cross-cultural. You have an insight cross-culturally, but if we were to look at you and say, well, you're white, does that exclude you? And so we need to have healthy, robust discussions about that, because it's not just about the brown face or the Black face and so forth. We need to talk about cross-culturalness and insight that all would bring to that piece or dimension, multi-dimensional aspects.
And again, I think that this is where the superintendent's experience helps us, that helping us to know which firm is best at getting to equitable outcomes for a diverse student body. And it also includes special education, right? And other issues of equity.
Yes, and so I would also add, then it goes to the question, because we have to be careful with the wording of the question and so there are certain things, and Sharon will kind of unpack like certain things that we can't ask people, but you can ask more open-ended questions, and hopefully they'll give you a sense of their experience working with diversity, or the diversity of their team. And so if you say, tell me about your company or tell me about your team, and then they might go into kind of, in the example with Dr. Baker, we have a doctor who has cross-cultural experiences and blah, 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 blah. And that's very different than saying, what is the genetic or the racial makeup of your team?
Right. I mean, I think too, to speak to Dr. Roby's point, there's other ways, what is your, your team, and how do you embrace diversity? So that's a very open end question. It'd be very interesting to hear the answer to that question, because it could go down many paths, perhaps.
Right.
So those are the ways that you can ask that without getting to a race-based type of inquiry.
Right. Yeah, experience working in a bilingual community for education is different than being bilingual, right? So,
Right.
so we need to make sure that that's okay. If everybody's okay with the rubric, and I think that what I like about it is broad. It can lead to a lot of discussion. It can allow for interpretations of different board members, and it's a scoring sheet that we use for guiding discussion and ultimately making decisions. But it's not the questions. Okay.
I'm sorry, Tony. I'm still confused with the first one. If you could scroll up to that one, Dr. Roby. When it says experience, are we specifically making note of experience with diverse, school districts, or just experience? Because I think that's two different things. So is it experience with diverse projects, or you know what I mean?
I do agree that someone could interpret this as, does the team have enough racial diversity? And from the conversation we just had seems to suggest that that's not what we're necessarily looking for. So
my worry with it just being, I hear you saying you like that it could be up for different interpretation. My worry for that is it could leave more room for somebody rating a 0 and somebody rating a 3. Right. And will that just end up making it really hard at the end?
Yeah, and we could just be arguing, why did you rate it a 3 when there weren't any?
Exactly. So I just want to be clear about what that element means, so that when I'm answering and giving them a number, it makes sense to everybody. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And my question is there a place for both? Like, it sounds like we're having a discussion about which question is more important. And I understand the space where we're saying, what question can we ask? What's a valid question to ask? But, like Reverend Matias said, I agree that everything is not banking on what is the makeup of, how many Black people do you have? How many white people? How many Asian American people? Like, I understand that portion, but I also think Ms. Williams made a really good point in the last meeting where she said, your commitment, what your team reflects, tells us about how you really do live out this DE&I lifestyle. And so I do think that there is like a small portion of that is valid to look at. So I do agree that looking at the first question does give broad, interpretation for people. But while we clarify that, if we clarify it more to one end than the other, I think there's validity in both ends of how it can be interpreted. And so I don't necessarily want to get rid of one for the other.
I agree. That's why I'm wondering if it's 2.
Can you make it 2? So then, if I'm hearing you all correctly, it would be experience of team members involved in the project. That's 1, and then diversity of team members involved in the project. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, and I think that that's still broad enough to leave interpretation. So I could be reading that as, what is the background of your team? Or I could be reading that and, what is your team's background and experience? How diverse, like, do you have people who have different types of experience and different types of, studies? So there's still some, breadth in there.
Right.
So Sharon, help us with that, because you can't, and I'm trying to make sure that we stay very well into our legal realm of.
Well, and the reason why I'm saying that is because if I'm answering that, if I'm in an interview and you ask me that, if my team is diverse, I'm going to tell you that, but I'm also not going to just hinge on that. I'm going to talk about our experience and our qualifications. If my team does not really have a physical diversity, then I'm going to hinge more on experience. And, I feel like if you've been really intentional to make sure that you have people from different backgrounds on your team, you're going to answer the question with some of that in there, right? Like, you're going to make sure that we know. If you're lacking, then we still gave you an out to answer it in a different way. That's still beneficial for us to know. But I'd like to leave the floor open for people who have been intentional about that to be able to let us know that.
Got it.
Is
Mr.
that, I
Helm?
don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd like to know what Sharon thinks, how we can ask that. I don't think that I don't think that we can discuss openly that team didn't have any Latinos, so we can't bring them in.
Yeah, let me think about that, because I think if we say if we just say the diversity of the team members involved in the project, one can make an assumption that we're asking for racial diversity. One could make an assumption that we're asking for gender diversity. The point is
Or
that
career diversity.
we haven't specified race or gender. And when you're talking about equity, and I think one of the things that we were talking about equity, depending on the question that we ask, see, the questions that we ask are going to be pivotal into this. So if you ask the right questions, the diversity of the team members involved in the project in and of itself on the rubric is not a problem. It's going to be it would become a problem associated with the questions if our questions are narrow based on if we say, well, tell us, how many Black people or how many white people do you, or do you have a racially, you can say, do you have a racially mixed or diverse group? That's not necessarily a problem asking that question, right? But if you ask it more specific, if we say specifically, well, you've got to have this, the quota issue, you've got to have this, you've got to have that, then that becomes a problem. So I think that we really have to focus on the question, because in and of itself, saying the diversity of the members of the team in the project on the rubric is not facially a problem.
if that's the case, let's pause on this part. Let's go to the questions, and then maybe we'll come up with a better way to parcel this out once we look at the question. So actually, I mean, John, yeah, okay, thanks.
And one of the reasons, may I just make one other point? One of the reasons is that you want to make sure that people, even if they're not racially diverse, they're at least culturally sensitive, because we're asking people to go into communities and have create spaces where they'll give them the kind of feedback we want. So it is important to understand. It is not unimportant to have questions around that, but do you understand what I'm saying? So that's why that's the connection. So just the way that we ask the question is important.
Okay. The interview questions, again, I think that we're not necessarily asking direct questions that relate directly to the rubric. We're supposed to surmise the answers. We're supposed to surmise the information in the rubric that comes from the question. So these aren't going to go specifically. So let's just go through. Just so and the other thing that we need to think about is the time limit. So we have 30 minutes, correct? It would be appropriate to ask the firms to give an introduction, and then to also have a chance to conclude in case they feel like the questions didn't answer things that they thought were important for us to consider. So which means that if we give 5 minutes on each end, we're talking about 20 minutes. We'll have to be short with these questions.
And you have to line these questions in some ways up to the rubric. If they answer these questions, will they help me be able to rate on the rubric?
Right. So even though they're not exactly the same, they should.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, okay. So think about that rubric as we go through. So the first one, based on the details of the RFP and other information you have learned about GRPS, what would you describe as one or two of our most pressing issues you would suggest guiding our district through? I like this. Would the firms have enough information to answer this question based on what we provided?
They should. They
Okay.
should, because they should have studied this district.
Okay.
Because again, they're going to do a presentation. What are they presenting on if it's not the district?
Right. No,
Yeah.
that's good. And then think about how would an answer to this question help the board to complete the rubric? And again, depending on the answer, I think could help with all four of them, but certainly the last two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these companies should be able to draw on their experience coming to the table, their team coming to the table, and then be able to provide us relevant information that would communicate to us, oh, yep, they seem well-rounded enough and know about us too. And then if they mention particular experiences or diversity of their team members and whatnot, and also districts that they've helped, should give us a well-roundedness. Oh yeah, they understand urban issues as well as they've worked in rural and other arenas. So.
Any other, let's go through all six and then think if we need to either get rid of some or add more. And so we'll come back. So I'll just read the next question until someone stops me. We imagine as you work through this process, we and you will learn a lot about perceptions and history of decisions made in GRPS. How will you work with our board, leaders, staff, and community of students and parents to enhance the trust and communication among and between stakeholder groups? So if you are asked that question in an interview, would you be able to follow and answer it?
You know, I kind of would like the question to kind of answer I mean, obviously we're trying to find that answer, but what I'm thinking is, in this next, would we put in there, for example, we went through, transformation phase, and now we're looking at whatever, I mean, we're defining that, but whatever our next phase is going to be. Would we put that a descriptive in there of what we're looking for, or?
Reverend Matthias, I don't know that we should, because again, these companies, and just, having recently gone through a interview process, you do your research, your background, and so they should be digging into our data, and that information is readily available where you can look. And then in addition to that, it's written in the RFP. So why would we put it in a question for them? They should be able to tell us something about our district, right?
Okay.
I'm wondering, Dr. Roby, given what you just said, and I agree with you, I'm wondering if for number 2, instead of we imagine as you go through this process, you'll learn, what if it said something like, based on the research you've done on our district and the history and perceptions of decisions made in GRPS, how would you specifically work with our
stakeholders, right? Because
Yeah, I was gonna
yeah.
say, do we have to list every group, or should we just be saying stakeholders?
I think if they've done their history, they will, if they've done their research, they will kind of have an idea of the relationship.
Yeah,
between,
and if they're doing this work with other districts, the stakeholders are the stakeholders, right? Like the stakeholders are the stakeholders across the board if you're really doing deep work.
Yep.
So based on the research you've done, we're going to assume you did because that's what a good firm would do. Based on the research you've done on our district and the way that we work with our stakeholders, how will you specifically build trust and communication? Does that make sense? Do you hear what I'm saying, I guess?
Well,
Kind of the way how you worded it the first time is.
Yeah.
how Kim worded it, I like
Instead
that.
of we imagine, I'm wondering if it would be better to say based on the
Yeah,
research you've done and what you have learned about our district.
I just want to make sure, Mr. Helmholt, are you typing this on your
I am.
copy?
I am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Because we're
Typing
getting the
it and
feedback, and I was
retyping it.
like, yeah, I was like, okay, somebody better be capturing this.
Based on the research you've done and what you have learned about our district
How will you work with?
and the perceptions and history of decisions made here, how will you specifically enhance the trust and communication among and between stakeholder groups?
So
We
I
really
wanna-
need to give the preface, like that the primer there, the based on it, is it too much to just go straight to the question?
Yeah, that was what I initially
It's still just a lot to
thought,
me. Like
Christian.
if you were so based on how we did the last round of interviews, someone was reading this question and saying it, that would get me like, what are you asking me? Like there's a lot coming before it.
Less is more. I think it's less is more is fine.
I
We just want to be
agree.
consistent.
That was my initial thought. What if we just ask the question that is part of this number 2? And then
If you wanted to add something at the end, but
you
at
could
least
add something that said, is there anything that you think specifically fits us based on your research that you've done on our district?
And you know why that piece, the piece I think is important. I like how you framed it, Mr. Davis, at the end. The piece is important about drawing it to our district, because otherwise you're just going to get a stock answer about, and really what you're trying to test is how much have they really studied our district so that they can give us something unique to our district. So I think I like the suggestion to put the question, up first, because otherwise you get kind of lost in it, but put that last piece so they know they just don't start with their canned answer.
Yeah, I like that. When someone's asking me a question in an interview, I like to know what the question is so I can be formulating it. But then, like you're saying, Ms. Pitts, that additional piece to make sure they make it specific is crucial as well.
And never mind. I'm just thinking about the part of the rubric that says methodology and specifics of plan or whatever. Maybe we do need to keep that more general, but somebody could interpret it as specificity to our district. So they can have a specific plan that's not really specific to us.
Right. So I have one more wrench to put in the spokes or whatever you call that. Are we hiring a firm to enhance trust and communication amongst stakeholder groups? Is that a goal of this project?
No, it yes and no. And here's my thought behind that is because you talk to so many different stakeholder groups, and a firm will be talking to you all. It'll be they'll be talking to principals. It'll be talking to cabinet. It'll be talking to parents, and so on forth. And so, how are they tracking that? Looking for common themes, or even where there clearly is some disconnect between groups. And so they're not necessarily building trust, but it's more about maybe the communication piece on as you are going through the different stakeholder groups, how are you kind of threading together the themes so as we're doing our work moving forward that there's not a disconnect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I like that. And that's kind of what I hoped that it was getting at yeah, so that's good. Okay, so did we get a final question written on that, John?
I was going to ask you so are we keeping based on the research you have done and what you have learned about our district?
No.
We're not. Because I
Are
thought
we
I just
going
heard
straight
back
to
and
how
forth
will
on
you
that.
work with?
It's just going straight. How will you specifically enhance trust and communication among and between stakeholder groups?
Period. Or was there
Yep.
something
No,
else?
there was an ending to that too.
Yeah.
Right. So then what if there's the question mark there? And then what if you said, please base this response on the research
Your
you've
research.
done, or, like
Yeah.
in
If
addition.
there's anything specifically related to our district based on the research you've done, please include that.
You could just say, please, just make it short. Please include in your answer, please, base your answer on specifics related to our district.
Yes.
Number 3, please describe the leadership style of the project management team that will be working most closely with us. Give an example of how they gather input to help move the work forward. I think there's kind of 2 questions there, but I kind of like them both, I think.
Straightforward.
This goes to methodology. It goes to also when you're talking about diversity of team, and so you can talk about diversity of experience in this example, but it also goes to methodology. It's like, okay, you got all this information. How are you moving it forward?
Right. And they'll tell us like, well, we make sure all voices are heard. We make sure we include, so they'll get to that,
Yeah, I don't know if it's needed, but one thing when I was going through all the RFPs, like if they had something completely different, it really stood out to me. If they had a different way of gathering information or of getting input from stakeholders, that really stood out to me. So I don't know if there's a way we could word it. Like if you have any unique ways that you think really enhance the process, please make sure you share those. I don't know. I just feel like a lot of the answers in the RFPs were just the same with every firm. Does that make sense?
They're not going to give away their secret sauce yet.
and don't you think that they should bring that forward? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's a softball that.
Yeah, that they should, if they say, well, we do, if they just say focus groups without saying.
So
anything
that's
more-
their
yeah,
job, not our job.
Yeah, I agree. If they're vague, then we make a note that they're vague, Next one, what 3 words would other districts that have used your services for strategic?
Tony, before you move on, I just want to make sure we're clear. Are we adding that part at the end or keeping it as is?
No, just leaving it as is.
Okay.
Number 4, what 3 words would other districts that have used your services for strategic planning use to describe your company? For me, I wouldn't mind moving. Yeah, I'd move that to the end, and I'm not sure because they're not going to say slow, non-responsive, and and poorly written. So even if they were.
For me, and I need to make sure I'm looking at all the other questions, but for me, I think I'm probably the person out of our colleagues who feels like this. I don't really care about the 3 words that they would use to describe you. I want to know, what is your biggest success? Where have you seen the most change? If you had to tell us about the district that has seen the biggest change from the work that you did, what does that look like? How many years ago was that, and how is it still affecting them? That's something that I care more about than 3 words that they would use to describe you.
That's great.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah, let's change that. Just say, tell us about a district that, I don't know how to phrase it. Tell us about a district that you worked with that, you know, had exceptional outcomes. Something.
Yeah, like tell us about some kids, some families, some communities you changed their lives. Like that's the work we're looking to do. So tell us about that.
I like just what she said. Just say it like that, because that's what we want to do. You know, we don't have to say districts or curriculum or whatever. Yeah. Families and communities and children. That's what we want to change. So.
Reverend Matthias, were you saying something? I thought I heard you.
No, I agreed.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Just straight up say it.
Okay, so this next one. So you got that, John?
Yes. I actually like the way Christian originally type, what I originally liked what Christian said the most was, what is the biggest success and most change that's come about from the strategic planning work you have done specific to families, communities, and children.
That's great.
Now I have a question about number 5. So I know that when Kim was talking about kind of laying something out, we said it was maybe too much of like a softball pitch, but I'm wondering here, like, what do you do different? So we know that there's an email form people can respond to. We know there are focus groups, like we know the basics, but I'm wondering what do people do that's different to reach certain groups of stakeholders? Like, or should we just leave it open?
Or could you say, how do you ensure that, what are the creative ways that you would ensure you reach the hardest to reach stakeholders or whatever? Because you're asking for not the traditional ways, and they may not have traditional ways. I mean, they may have traditional and non-traditional ways, but if you leave it open-ended, you might say something like, how do you reach the hardest to reach stakeholders?
How do you engage the hardest to reach?
Yes. I do.
Yeah,
like
I'm thinking.
creative.
Yeah.
I think that gets what you asked, both of you, Ms. Grant and Ms. Davis. I think you're asking for unique. When you say creative, that automatically makes people think, okay, they're not looking for the usual. So I like that word in the.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And then, but I do like, the second piece, that subcontracting piece. My question to us when we talk about something like that, is there, and I'm sorry if I missed conversation around that, are we looking at like maybe some of the more local people who applied but didn't have like the larger teams? Or would we look at maybe those being subcontractors? Or are we looking at maybe people that we've worked with before that we would reach out to?
I don't think we necessarily landed on it, but we wanted to allow flexibility for that. And so not remembering where the 3 companies were from, but let's say if they're not local, and so in between meetings and different things, there would be an opportunity. But I didn't get an indication that the board, other than bringing up an interest around that, but not necessarily saying they'd have to answer affirmatively that they'd be willing to work with local companies.
Right. I think this seems kind of like a trick question. At one level, if they say they would consider subcontracting, they're giving us a perception that they don't think that they have the adequate staff to do it themselves, which could be viewed as a negative. At the other level, it seems like a tough place to put this question. We're kind of
question. So they didn't feel like, because I do see what you're saying, when those 2 questions are compounded, it's like, this work is important to us. What if you can't do it type thing?
Right.
So what if we made that a separate question, maybe not right next to each other, maybe so, but just, saying it's something that we're wondering.
Maybe we should just make it as a statement that we make, that just so you know, we are willing to introduce you to some local firms that could assist with reaching hard to reach stakeholders or something. And that way they don't feel compelled to to try to figure out what we want. Because they may be like, do they want us to bring in somebody else, or do they not want, or do they want us to not need anybody else? This way, we're going to say, just so you know, we are willing to contract with the firm to assist that knows our community.
And should that statement be made after the question is answered? Because I still want them to answer as creatively as they can about how they would reach out to
Yeah,
them.
that part we need. Yeah.
Yeah, I probably would put that as some closing comments and not associated with the questions, because as I was trying to think about it, I was trying to think if I'm rating on the rubric, kind of where would I put that? Because that's not really methodology. It could be methodology, might be the only place, but if I say no, because we didn't require that, so it gets a little tricky. So I think making it a statement at the end in the closing comments.
Okay. So we have to make sure somebody gets assigned to say that. So let's just talk about this, and then we can talk about what might be missing, if anything is missing. How does your company gather information about current and future trends in education? How does your company use that information to work with districts? I'm okay with it as it's written, I guess. I mean, I might.
Yeah, I'm okay the way it's written as well. And again, I think as Ms. Grant alluded, I think looking for a lot of really creative ways that, based on the trends that they're seeing, Michigan and broader, and then what they've read in our history and stuff, that they're going to say to us, based on your promise zone, this, that, and the other thing, you guys really should be blah 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 blah, and give us some stuff. So
yeah, the only thing
Should we ask for an example?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Based on what you're saying, Reverend Matthias, and just everyone, is this too specific of a place to ask for an example of like how they've done something like that in the past, how they've applied, trends to a project, or is this something that should be more broad?
I think that's what I think that this last part is saying. Give us an example of how you've used this information to help districts.
I'm glad we're having this discussion, because I look at it as more broad, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. I think the example would be further up when we ask, wherever the question was, I don't know if it was question 4 or question... We talked about kind of creative, it's a little different, how to reach, creative stakeholders in a creative way. Think about this strategic plan. We said it's going to be 5 to 8 years out. And so it's important that anybody who is working with schools has a vision and can help districts kind of envision what the work looks like currently, because we're not planning for 2021. It's done. We are planning for what are we going to be experiencing in 2030. And we want to know, how do they help us kind of envision what that looks like? And an example may be of use, but I was thinking more broadly from the standpoint of, okay, how do they keep abreast of what current trends are? And then also, do they have any insight and vision on what future trends are in public education?
Dr. Roby, though, would there be an expectation in that's in a part of the deliverables? I'm just wondering how.
It should be in the deliverables, yes. It's like, because we're not planning for, because
not just that they are, great erudite thinkers, but that they would leave something with the district or be able to, for it to be used. Is that what your thinking was?
Yes, I think it's really important when we talk about, like, even with buildings as an example, you don't build a building or reconstruct a building for 2021. You build it for the next
30 years, because by the time that you go back into that building to make changes, it's like you have to be enough of a visionary that the building is flexible and adaptable, that you're able to make an adjustment for it. And I'm talking about school buildings, not houses or anything like that. Same thing for public education. It's like we've got to be able to think, what are our students going to look like in 2030, and work backwards from there.
Right, and I think that the way they answer this question would be, are they just using buzzwords about trends, right? You know, and because the last thing we need is somebody that's redefining 21st century education, which we've been doing now for 30 years. So.
Absolutely. Wait, we're 21 years into the 21st century, so it's like,
yeah.
Really?
So, yes. I just want to get to 2030.
The only thing, the couple things I was going to say is you could probably combine it if it makes it less confusing. Like, how does your company gather information about current and future trends in education and use that information instead of 2 questions? Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then the other suggestion, and please somebody speak up if you see it differently. In my head, I see this question being up higher, starting because it's not asking specifically for our district. And for some reason, in my head, I want the questions like broad and then specifically to us. I don't know why.
Oh, start broad and then narrow. Yeah.
I had that thought too. That was a more of an introductory type question.
Yeah, and that might even make them feel better as they're kind of easing input. So.
Is it okay to make it question 2?
Sure.
That's good.
Yeah, and maybe just think about how you feel about what I just said and reorder the questions that way if you agree. I mean, I don't know if that's a thing, but for some reason my head wants to organize it like that.
We can go with your head. So, okay, a couple of quick questions. I know that Kim has to leave in a moment. So 2 questions. One is, I think that the length is fine, because given that we really only have 20 minutes, this is plenty. Think about how this fits the rubric. I like the way I think that we will learn a lot about the firms by them answering these questions. And I think that we will even learn about what is important to them as it relates to diversity. We may not learn some of the specifics that we want to know about diversity, but are these 6 questions good for the interview? And are they enough information to help us with the rubric, and we could also change the rubric? I think that we learn a lot about the firm from these 6.
So just so I understand, we're leaving the question about the experience of the team and the diversity of the team out of the questions altogether. So how in the rubric, I know it's in the rubric, but
So we would be determining, when they answer the questions, did they make reference to school districts that had characteristics similar to ours? Did they only talk about homogeneous school districts versus diverse school districts? Did they talk about experience? Did they mention experiences? So I would be listening is like, well, it sounds like they never had a community meeting with a non-English speaking group, because they never mentioned it. So those would be ways that we could surmise it without saying, have you worked with it? So that's.
But the way that these questions are set up, I mean, obviously they should be looking through that lens, but the way we've laid the questions out, I could give you a lot of in-depth questions about the work without the details of who the work was with or where the work was. Like, you know, these questions don't really get to that.
Can I offer a suggestion? And I am so spitballing as I say this. Could we say something such as Grand Rapids Public Schools is a diverse urban district. How will your team align with our diversity and explain what that looks like? Because I'm trying to get to, I hear what you're saying, Ms. Grant. I'm trying to get to how, because we want to leave it open-ended enough to allow them to tell us versus leading them and kind of pigeonholing them to kind of saying, I have this many Latinos, this many African Americans, this many whites. It's like we're saying, we're just calling it out. We are a diverse school district, urban school district, and we can even say, 20% of our students are this, 40% of our students are that.
Yeah, I think that's even more straightforward, though. I think that's more straightforward than anything else we ask. If we say, how does your team align with the diversity of our district? To me, that's very, if we're trying to, I don't know. And I think because I really want to know, and we have the resumes, so that kind of answers some of the experience diversity. I'm not against the way that you positioned it. I'm just saying, to me, that seems more straightforward than any of the other ways that we laid it out.
Well, I think I'm combining the two. Could we say, we want to make sure the strategic plan adequately addresses the racial diversity of our district? How can you help us do that? And then see how they answer that.
And tell me if I'm wrong, but I really like what Mrs. Williams said, was that this week, where she said, like, how does, this isn't the question, but like the makeup of their team kind of reflects how much they prioritize and how important they see diversity, in their own ranks. So is there a question that we can ask that just says, tell us about your team and how you prioritize, or, how important, I don't know, but I really like, that's the lens that I'm looking at it through, because, as Reverend Mattia said, just because you have like this certain makeup doesn't mean that you're more qualified or less qualified, in a certain way. But I do think it tells us about how important this really is to you, right? Like how you're living it in your own daily lives on your team. So that's the question I'm trying to get to. Like, how do we ask in that way? Like, that tells us about if you're really putting your money where your mouth is.
So Kim just put in the chat, well, I guess Kim is still here, that just a more open-ended question that might allow them to answer the question and get at, did we lose Christian?
No, I'm here. My laptop's dying though, so I'm getting there.
Okay. All right.
Yes, but I don't know the exact question to ask, but that I'm wondering, what do we ask to get to that answer? Like telling us how important it is to you, and not to be like sentimental, but why do you do this work? What is this work about? Is it because DE&I is making a lot of money right now, and so you decided this is where you should be? Like, why is this work important to you, and how do you reflect that through your team, and the work that you've done?
Yeah, I do like Kim's message there about, tell us how your firm embraces diversity as a way of getting at some of what Ms. Grant is saying. What's the passion behind it? And then how is that reflected? Or how does that, the mix of your team, if it leans towards a certain group of people, all Caucasian or all Asian or whatever, but how does even that, what's the cross-cultural experience of that team? and whatnot. I mean, whether assuming they would see it that way.
Could you tell us how your firm embraces diversity and how that's reflected in your team?
Yeah.
If you think that's a question we can ask, then I like it. And I'm sorry, I didn't see Kim's full question before, but yeah, I do. I like that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think that it gives them a way to answer the question. And hopefully, I mean, just having, you know, like they used to do in the 80s and 90s with racial diversity workshop, a salt and pepper team doesn't mean that that they've actually. I also want to know is that did math scores change and become more equitable in the school district? So that's what we're kind of getting at. But I think embracing diversity, and then if it sounds like it's that it's superficial, we'll know that, based on their answer.
And you asked a question, Dr. Baker, that you asked at the end about give us the meat of how you've changed or something.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the combination of those, it should be the combination of all of these questions that build
exactly
for you.
And
I think that point. I like that point because I don't think one question should sink or swim because with any group or any candidate that we will see, it's a compilation of their whole work, and so they'll have answers that they're stronger in than others. But it's one question shouldn't be the only question. I think they have to be equally weighted, and I like how Sharon you phrased that question. Mr. Hemholt, I'm trusting that you captured that.
Yeah. I have that. This is the tell us how your firm embraces diversity and how that is reflected in your team. And I added, and the work of your team. And I was going to ask you if you think it's not just about the team, but it's also the work of the team, because they may have engaged other stakeholders or hired local firms or whatever it may be.
Is there any, I like that, John. Is there any benefit to putting tell us how your firm embraces equity and diversity?
Yep.
Does that add, because, and how is that reflected in your team, and then whatever John added to that?
Yep. And the work of your team.
Then that gets to rubric question 1, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Where do you want that question? You want it as number 7?
I thought we were getting rid of. Weren't we getting rid of question 5? What 3 words?
Yeah,
I know it was okay.
Replace that with another question. Question 5 no longer exists.
Keep in mind they have 30 minutes, and 10 of it is supposed to be for presentation. So we want to make sure, because I would imagine that the question itself is about 30 seconds, and then you got to give people 2 to 3 minutes to answer each question. Realistically,
so
if
is
you
number
want to
4, I'm sorry, not number 4, but yeah, it is number 4 on there. I'm wondering if, look at number 4 and then look at what we just talked about. And I'm wondering if you can kind of merge those two somehow.
Yeah.
Now let's leave them separate.
Well, because number 4 is about methodology more so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I do want to know if we don't know how do they have a meeting with the refugee community, then this is 2 different chances to answer a similar question. So I'd like to propose, I want to go back to the rubric as the last thing, but with what Dr. Roby just said in terms of time, I would
give them about 2 minutes, Tony. It gives us a little under 1 minute to ask it, which I think is more than enough. And then, so what it breaks down to is 2.85 minutes. So gives them a little bit over 2 minutes to answer each question.
Okay, and here's what I'm thinking is that like when we did the superintendent interviews, we each asked a question, we went round robin. I don't think that we need that.
Those questions were long, by the way. I'll just say that. Now that I have the job, I have to write the questions down because those are some long questions. I was like, there's like 4 questions in there.
Right. And that was, I didn't write any of those, by the way. It was, no, but, and the other thing that it does is it gives us, the individual asks the question. And I'm not singling out John Matthias right now.
Right.
This is definitely not related to Reverend Matthias or any other reverends on this call. So, but it gives us the kind of sense that we can ask follow-up questions. And what I'd like to propose is, could we have a designated interviewer? And designated interview is one person, same person all the way through, perhaps Jen or somebody or a staff person, and the board just listens, and the interviewer is kind of keeping track of time and says that, okay, we need to move on to get on to the next question. Would that be
Actually, you would need two people. You would need two people. The interviewer, because he or she should just be asking the questions, and then you just need a timekeeper to say, okay, you're at the, you're at the halfway point, because it helps people to know when they're at the halfway point. If you have 30 minutes, it's like, I'm at the halfway point, I got to speed it up.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's pretty important to most people to feel like involved in a way. And we went through this same conversation in the superintendent, which is different, hiring a firm and hiring the superintendent, but it just felt like, let's find a way for everybody to be involved in this. And that's just my 2 cents. It made a difference for people in the last go round.
Yeah, it's just
I don't
that
care
on this one, we only have 6 questions, or I guess 7 questions now. And I don't think that, I think what I fear is that we're going to lose a chance for people to answer like that last question. I think it's, we could at least have the timekeeper, but I think that we also lose time by keeping track of whose turn it is to give questions, to answer questions and stuff. And it's Zoom. I always felt like I stopped listening to the end of the question before mine because I was wanting to make sure I was prepared to ask my question. And since there's only 6 or 7 questions, and if we rotate, then we're going to have a different question each time we ask the question. Somebody different is going to be asking the question.
I agree. No, one person asking the question. And honestly, if it's a staff member, then all board members can be focused on answers. Like, like we can be really tuned in. And I do agree that the question person and the timekeeper should be, but if it was a staff member, they probably could keep time because they're just focused on like asking the question.
The staff person doesn't really need to listen to the answer. They just need to know the time,
So can we offer up one of our staff members? It can be one of the 3 of us, or we can designate someone else and then to be a timekeeper. And I heard you say, Dr. Baker, that you would like me to kind of weigh in on it. And so I'm okay with asking questions, but then that doesn't always allow me.
Yeah, no,
I'd like to take
you
notes.
3 should be out. We'd like for you guys to be able to hear the answers and take notes as well.
Okay. So then we'll designate a staff member so that all board members are able to just listen to the responses, and then we'll designate a second staff member to be the timekeeper. And then their only job is at the halfway point. So if it's 30 minutes, they say, okay, you're at the halfway point, and we'll make sure that each firm knows that at the very beginning that there will be a timekeeper who will interrupt at some point to say you're at the the 15-minute mark.
Okay.
Question: are you doing the presentation first or the interview first?
I think that they should introduce themselves. I'm firm X, and we're happy to be considered. And this is why, and then they go in, and then we give the questions. And then at the end, they have another 5 minutes just to make sure that, you didn't ask about this, but I think that this is really important and I didn't get a chance to share it earlier, that kind of thing.
5-minute or less opening statement, 5-minute or less closing statement.
Yeah, which means that really when you give that halfway, I guess it's still halfway anyway. But it's really halfway of 10-minute interview, so they know that they only get 10 minutes to answer the rest of the questions.
And then too, the board members, I think would have to know that there can be no follow-up questions.
Right.
Because you won't have time for any, so you have to judge based on whatever they answer.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a note, like in Jen's opening statement, maybe that's a note, because, you know, our timeline is so tight this evening, we won't be able to answer follow-up questions. So please, you know, provide as much for us as you can in your answer.
Okay, that's good. Thanks for that. And so you'll let us know on Monday who on that staff gets the short straw and has to do this on Monday night, right? So.
I have someone in mind.
Gorman do it.
Wait, and that's who I thought
show
of.
up to this meeting.
That's what happens when you miss a meeting.
That's right, man. All right. Finally is back to the rubric. Since we kept that, and this rubric is, let me ask one more question of Sharon. This is a private, I guess we'll be deliberating this. If we keep experience, we got to figure out what to do with this one element. Do we split it or do we change the wording?
Well, since you asked a specific question about how they do equity and diversity, we could certainly, you know, split it because you have that, we're asking a specific, we're calling that out.
Well, the second question says experience of the firm with strategic planning with equity focus.
So this first one could just be about the question that we asked, they would get the answer to the question that you asked about equity and diversity of the team, et cetera. Their experiences in however we ask that question.
How do we, how do we write this rubric item then? Because it is a direct answer to a question, but
Did he freeze? Did he freeze?
No.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you froze.
Yeah, I froze, but not my screen, just me. So I'm just trying to think through how to phrase this because I don't want it to be an exact duplicate of the.
Yeah, too.
And I do want to be able to take into account their other responses, but it may look like it's just that. How about just ability to work with the diversity of our district? And then we can take into account the diversity of their staff, or ability to address the equity issues in our district. So that's kind of in the second question. Experience with diversity in prior work experiences. Christian, it looks like you got an opinion. You're just not saying it.
Nah, I'm just kind of like, I think it's okay to have I think it's okay as is. We are going to be able to have like a brief, time to, well, now that I'm thinking about talking this out in the open.
There ain't no brief.
I kind of think that it is the way that it is now is probably because then you can consider all the
parts.
And especially, and I keep drawing to the fact that you're asking a couple questions that could hit this this thing. So I kind of like the way it is right now.
Yeah, we could just express at the beginning of the rubric, when people do the rubric, that it's intentionally multifaceted. It's not meant to just be counting up diverse staff people, but it's taking into account diversity in lots of ways. And, you know, so I like that.
We won't get this until Monday night.
Oh,
Well, I guess we could have it sent out ahead of time.
Because if it's sent out ahead of time, there could just be some language in the email. But I personally don't think. No, I think quarantine's made me more like I don't think it needs like an introduction. I think that it meets several levels and people will have notes to make. Now, I'm no longer in the hot seat of managing open discussion. So I do think that the open discussion could potentially be interesting, but is that for us to try to put a cap on or manage? I don't know.
Yeah, I do like the way that the question is posed, only because I hope that that people are not narrow-minded enough to just be looking at equity and diversity, you know, and just this siloing, but being able to be fluid in that and looking for the whole. I would say that most of us think that way or could look and discern that way. So that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I like this because I do think, though, I mean, the first thing when we opened up this discussion, the first thing that happened was Kim question, what does this mean? I would imagine this is going to happen on Monday. And so we're going to have to say what we mean is, are they good? Is their experience with diversity, they're good at working with multiple different ethnic groups? Are they good with recognizing the value of diversity in their own team? Are they good with understanding the needs of the current inequities in our school district and how to address those? There's a lot of different ways to answer that. Could we just say ability to maybe we say ability to create equity in our district, and people interpret that differently.
But keep in mind, they're not creating equity in our district. We already have equity in our district. It's about how do they embrace and engage others. And then the other part I would say is, you don't want to go into too much explanation prior to the interviews, because what I would do, I would listen to this discussion and say, okay, I'm gonna make sure I tick this off. And so it's about after the interviews to say, okay, here's the rubric. This is what you're expected to do over the next, day to, write down your own notes related to this. And then you can explain it, because then the interview has taken place and it's already too late for anybody to kind of change their perspective.
What is the process, Dr. Baker, of after the interview in terms of the scoring? What did you all have in mind about that?
Well, I thought we should mention that so at some point. We're making a decision on Monday night about who to hire. When are we making the decision? You encouraged us to complete the sheets on Monday night.
Yes.
When would we deliberate?
The next Monday.
The next
Monday. Yep.
So on Monday, so we would on Monday night
after you've interviewed or listened to everybody, and that way it's still fresh in your mind. And I sent you an email about this. It's like the further out you get from something, then it becomes more general, and then also stuff starts to bleed together, so to speak. Yeah. And so it makes sense that while it's fresh, it's like, oh, company A said this, company B, I'm sorry, my dog is barking. Company B said this, and and kind of keep your notes. And then afterwards, I mean, we can still give directions, I think, after the interviews are complete with respect to the rubric, to say, please make sure that you are looking at your notes and, judging it based on XYZ.
Okay, so let's, so everybody would, so that night, so when we're done with the last interview on Monday night, we'll be done. except we will have, except a reminder to the board to be sure to complete their forms. The board would be, this would be, we would all have our own paper copies. We would all make our own paper copies of this and complete it. And then we would each save our own paper copies for use the following week. And okay, so that's good. So then we would also be the first, so in terms of answering this, let's, how about this? How about if this rubric and the questions get sent out tomorrow with the packet, and that if anyone has a question about the rubric or the questions, to contact one of the committee members. And then they can explain, okay, well, if you don't know what what we mean by this is everything that it means, okay? And that's the way we respond. And just say that we're taking into account all of the different ways that diversity is important to us as individual board members. Is that good?
I do think that the questions give some clarification too. Like, so when Kim originally asked that, her question, we didn't have the questions,
right,
with us.
Exactly.
So I do feel like the questions clarify the rubric a bit more, which means we've done our job as this committee, to have correlation between the two.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a rubric. We wrote questions that we thought got people to the answers of this rubric, and that's what we produced. So let's just go with that. Is that good? Dr. Roby, is that a questioning face or okay, great. Or is it, am I ever going to get dinner face?
No, that sounds really good.
Okay.
And again, we want to frame, and I know Sharon will kind of tee it up with making sure that we are following kind of, any of those kind of laws so that we stay very much in our realm of being appropriate. And so she'll frame that up, and we'll make sure that that's shared publicly with everybody as well.
Okay. All right, great. Do you need, I guess Julie will be probably sending this out if there's anything else. It will be important that people ask these questions before Monday night and not on Monday night. So we don't want the interviewee sitting there while we're discussing what we mean by this rubric. Okay.
I will add it also to my newsletter just to say, to remind people to review the rubric and the questions, and so that they're prepared. If they do have questions, I'm going to actually direct them to you because you are the ad hoc chair, but anybody should be able to answer it based on our conversations, but we want to make sure just for consistency, if that helps.
Okay.
Dr. Ruby,
yes.
We also sent to the entire board the 2 documents that we sent to the committee, the guidelines, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The common mistakes.
Okay. All right, we're in good shape. And then, yeah, let's, I'm just gonna, unless people object, but I think that at some point, Dr. Roby, next week, it would be nice to get your feedback on this. I don't know if you want to, I don't know how we do that, but that you're expressing your either reservations about any particular firm or I don't know if you want to say just I want this firm, but I really think
Sure.
Yeah,
what I plan on doing is taking notes right along with you all, and then I won't necessarily score because I want to make sure that I stay in my lane. And what I will do is just take notes on what each firm shares, and then as you all are discussing, as you ask me or invite me to weigh in, and I can share what I heard.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, we'll see everybody on Monday night, and it sounds like there's not much else going on in the district other than this right now.
Dr. Baker.
Ha ha ha.
Yeah. I mean,
Dr.
I would.
Baker.
I mean, that is because if I'm not reading those emails that show up every minute, then there's a lot of spare time. Yeah. Yes, John.
I just wanted to, I posted in the chat that the firms are asking whether or not the questions are going to be posted in advance. The concern was from Greenway is that they're going first and the other two could be getting the questions and in advance, and they have 30 minutes or more to prep. Obviously, of course, they could tune in and watch this video and be seeing what the questions are. So I just want to know what our response is.
I don't know what the appropriate response is. I think that there's at least one firm that has tuned in. So so I don't know, do we want to put them out in advance, or, I mean, they're kind of written now. So if firms, I mean, I guess we could just say the questions are written, here they are.
And two, they have more pressure if they have, I think the board's expectation could be certainly higher, the quality of the answers if the questions are already known.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind them having the questions, and you're right. Then we're gonna be able to have robust conversations, and they should be able to provide us that much more evidence, and for us to that much more respond to some of what we're looking for in that.
Yeah, we might as well just do that. That way we stop pretending whether or not it's happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of, it's unfortunate, but there's this Open Meetings Act thing. So, so there's no surprises. So anyway, Dr. Roby, did you listen in? Dr. Roby?
And actually, and so, because I knew that this would come up, I actually did not. I turned off my cell phone when I was sitting in that little room, because what I did not want is the noise of other people sending me stuff. And I was like, you know what? I'm showing up as Leidre and Roby. They're either going to like me or they're not. And so I did not have the questions in advance because I did not want to have answers that sounded polished. It's like I wanted to show up as my authentic, human, flawed self. So, and truly, I turned off my cell